Wintertime is here, so that means Christmas is coming. So what are my thoughts on Christmas? We're going to take a look at that today.
Let there be light. Let there be light.
Thanks again for tuning into the channel. So today, obviously, with Christmas coming up and all these other holidays that are coming up on us, I just want to kind of go into that topic and explain my position on that. If you've been watching this channel, you understand that I identify myself with that of Israel. And what that means is that I follow the voice of the God of Israel in obeying the laws that are given in the books of Moses. I use the Hebrew scriptures, known as the Tanakh in Jewish culture, to shape all my viewpoints. So if something doesn't align with that, then I throw it out. But you have to understand that Israel is a separated people. And with that comes with, persecution. You're going to stand out from other people. Why is that? Because God says, I need a people that I can call my own. I need a people that will follow my own laws, my own statutes, my own, celebrations. All these different festivals that I give, I need a people that are going to follow it so I can have a people that I can call my own. If you look at Deuteronomy 28 verse 9, he says, if you'll keep my commandments, then you'll be a holy people unto me. And that's really what he's looking for. He's just looking for a faithful few that he can call his own that would live in the land of Israel one day. And that's just the position that I've taken. Throughout history, you can see plenty of kings who went away from these ordinances. When the kingdom was actually split between Solomon's son Rehoboam, taking the tribe of Judah, and Jeroboam, who took the other 10 tribes, ever since then, the kingdom's been divided. And why was the kingdom divided? Ask yourself that first. The reason why the kingdom was divided was because King Solomon had brought in pagan and outside sources to influence the kingdom, and they no longer followed the God of Israel. They no longer kept his covenant. So God split the kingdom in half, and he gave Rehoboam, Judah, to keep one tribe for the sake of David, his servant, who was faithful and kept those commandments and led the people in truth. And then he gave the other 10 tribes to Jeroboam. Now, one of the things that Jeroboam did was he started to create his own festivals. He started to create his own celebrations. And so what he did, if you look in 1 Kings chapter 12 and 13, you'll see that Jeroboam took 2 calves, and in the place where he was, he set up those 2 calves and created his own festival in the 8th month rather than the 7th to have the people come and sacrifice to those 2 golden images. The problem here is that he's created another god for the people to worship, but he's also went and taken it upon himself to create his own festivals. And that's part of what I want to bring up in this conversation today about Christmas. Those 2 principles is worshiping another god and then also creating our own festivals. One of the biggest sins in Israel's history, right, was that of Moses going up to the mount the 40 days and then he delayed to come out. And what did the people do? They did the exact same thing. They took it upon themselves and said to Aaron, they said, come, let's make our own gods. And so what did he do? He created a golden image. And then what's interesting, though, about this is look at what the people said. Look at what Aaron said to the people. Once he made this molten image, he said, tomorrow is a feast unto Jehovah. So they made their own feast unto God, and then they created an image to actually worship. So when we're talking about the festivals that the God of Israel has given us to those that follow his words, you can view those in Leviticus chapter 23. And what you'll find is if you're going through those, of course, he lists that every 7th day is a Sabbath to the God of Israel, to Jehovah. We're supposed to keep that, as opposed to Sunday that many in the Christian circles will keep. Not all, but most do. You'll also see that God gives all his feasts, all of his holidays that he gives us are in the summertime. None of them are in the wintertime. But today, in Jewish circles, there is a feast that many will keep in honor of a historical thing that happened to the Jews, and that is Hanukkah. Now, Hanukkah is not a mandated feast. It is a tradition. But I think it's interesting for Christians to realize something is that Jesus didn't keep Christmas. He kept the Feast of Dedication. That's what Hanukkah is all about. And if you understand what the story of Hanukkah is all about, you'll understand why I don't keep Christmas. It's not that I choose Hanukkah over Christmas. It's not choosing one celebration over another. What Hanukkah is all about was a rededication to the temple. It was a rededication of the altar back to the God of Israel. Because what was happening was there was a big persecution headed up by the wicked king Antiochus Epiphanes. And the story basically starts out where there was a group of traitorous Jews who had no regard for the law. One thing I want a lot of people to realize is that the book of the Maccabees used to be a part of the canon. If you look at this book, you'll see the historical value, and you'll see an important message that is displayed because of this story. Those traitorous Jews who had no regard for the law, they said, we don't want to follow the customs anymore. They said, look, all of this obedience to the law and our lack of a willingness to assimilate with the Gentiles has brought nothing but persecution, and they couldn't withstand that persecution. So all of a sudden, King Antiochus Epiphanes, whose name very means God manifest, this guy was the most arrogant king that ever came about, and he persecuted the Jews immensely. You couldn't imagine it. So what he wanted to do is he wanted the people to become one people. And you can't do that. You can't get unity out of a nation if you have a group of people going their own separate way. And that's what Israel is. That's what we're called to be. We are always going to be going against the grain because we have our own commandments given by the God of Israel that we're supposed to follow that are very different from all the other nations. That's what Israel is. It's a nation called by the name of Jehovah to worship him only as the one and only God, and then to follow those statutes that he's given us. And we're going to stand out. And that's not what Antiochus Epiphanes wanted. Antiochus Epiphanes wanted a people that would be unified. So what did he do? Take a look at some of these passages from the book of the Maccabees and see what I'm talking about. Antiochus now issued a decree that all nations in his empire should abandon their own customs and become one people. All the Gentiles and even many of the Israelites submitted to this decree. They adopted the official pagan religion, offered sacrifices to idols, and no longer observed the Sabbath. Now, you might be looking at this and say, well, yeah, that looks a lot like today's society, right? Most people don't celebrate the Sabbath, they've abandoned it, and they've created their own customs. And that's exactly what Hanukkah is about. That's why I want to bring this to light, because there is a story here that I want people to realize. So if you'll notice here, you'll see that there's going to be pagan celebrations. He wanted the people to adopt pagan religions. And whether you know it or not, you can do your own research outside of this video, but Christmas, it stems from very, very much pagan philosophies. The very idea of worship of Jesus on December 25th takes place because of pagan origins, where they would worship the sun god on the winter solstice on Kislev 25. And the ideas of the Christmas tree, everything, all this stuff stems from ancient Babylon. All of this stuff stems from those ancient cultures, and what happened is back in the day, they wanted to take and assimilate, just like Antiochus Epiphanes has done. He wanted to assimilate the people. The people wanted to keep their own pagan customs, but they had to figure out a way to conjoin the Christians together. So they adopted Jesus as the centerpiece of it, and still adopted many of the traditions that came along with those pagan traditions. But again, I always use this scripture, and God always says, look, no, I want you to keep my Sabbaths, keep my celebrations that I gave you. Don't keep the ones that your fathers keep, just listen unto my voice. And that's what I always bring up in Ezekiel chapter 20. And over again, he says to not walk in the ways of your fathers, but keep my Sabbaths, that they be a sign between you and I. But nobody ever listened. So for me, and what this story of Hanukkah really represents is I'm that faithful few. I want to be a part of that remnant. I want to be somebody that will follow the God of Israel's voice, and I will stand out from the crowd. I don't mind that. That's what the book of the Maccabees was about. Some of the people said even at that time, we choose to suffer willingly, to stay faithful to the God of Israel. We count it our glory to do so. Why? Because God says he'll raise us up at the end of days because we've kept his laws. That's what Maccabees will state. So what happened going forth with this decree? King Antiochus comes along. He wants to assimilate all the people to be one. So there's a penalty for the people. If they didn't choose to adopt these pagan traditions and forsake the Sabbath, forsake circumcision, everything that God had given to the people of Israel to be a holy people unto himself, there was a penalty for that, and that was death. Take a look. They were commanded to build pagan altars, temples, and shrines, to sacrifice pigs and other unclean animals there. They were forbidden to circumcise their sons, and they were required to make themselves ritually unclean in every way they could, so that they would forget the law which Jehovah had given through Moses and would disobey all its commands. The penalty for disobeying the king's decree was death. So put yourself in the shoes of those people then. What would you do? Would you be willing to stand against the grain? Some were. And what happened is they resisted the decree. They preferred to die rather than to forsake the customs that the God of Israel had given them. And I'm just wondering how many would be willing to do that today. So what happened after that was there was a revolt. There was a faithful few that decided that they were not going to bow the knee to another god. They were not going to keep the pagan celebrations. They were going to be faithful to that covenant the God of Israel had given them. And that revolt was led by Mattathias and later by Judas Maccabee. Take a look. Mattathias answered in a loud voice, "I don't care if every Gentile in this empire has obeyed the king and yielded to the command to abandon the religion of his ancestors. My children, my relatives, and I will continue to keep the covenant that God made with our ancestors. With God's help, we will never abandon his law or disobey his commands. We will not obey the king's decree, and we will not change our way of worship in the least." Then Mattathias went through the town shouting, "Everyone who is faithful to God's covenant and obeys his law, follow me." With this, he and his sons fled into the mountains, leaving behind all that they owned. Now, we've all heard of the phrase called the abomination of desolation. What's interesting, and I want people to understand, is that if you read the book of Daniel, chapters 9 through 12, that is describing the very story of the book of the Maccabees. And I want people to understand that this story has relevance today. The abomination of desolation was the idea that Antiochus Epiphanes would take a Greek statue called Zeus. Zeus was known as the god of the underworld, and he was in charge of Hades, as you know it today as hell, and he gave passageway to hell. So they placed this golden image, they placed this image of Zeus in the temple on top of the altar. And Antiochus Epiphanes, to unite all the people under his own customs, said, "Any who will not fall down and worship this will be put to death." Now this sounds familiar, and I'm sure it does. If you read the book of Daniel itself, he was faced with this same reality. He was faced with the same test. And if you look at Daniel and his buddies, they didn't bow down to any other god. It's not only about bowing down to an image. Most people have the idea that idolatry is just bowing down to something that has been carved by human hands. The reality is idolatry is worshiping anything other than the God of Israel and by his name, which is Yehovah. Idolatry is a Hebrew term. It stems from the idea that the Hebrews claim that there's one God and the worship of any other is the definition of idolatry. So if I'm faced with worshiping another God that is not named Yehovah, and if I'm faced with keeping a festival, keeping a celebration that has no relevance or was not commanded by my God to do so, as outlined in Leviticus 23, I am committing idolatry if I do that. And the same thing goes with this story of Hanukkah that coincides with Christmas every single year. There's a group that stands strong and they worship the God of Israel, and they're willing to face that threat of persecution in not doing so. Look, this is going to be my fourth Christmas that I have sat out on. My family comes into town every year and they celebrate Christmas, and I don't celebrate it with them. That doesn't mean I have any ill will against them. It's just a stand that it's a testimony that is going to stand later, that's going to help them and understand that, look, all I did was keep the commandments of the God of Israel. I stayed faithful to those commandments, and I was willing to suffer persecution for it. You know, and you look at the decree that Mattathias said, and he said, "All those that are faithful to God's covenant follow me." And what's very ironic is that even though I'm not a Christian and I don't celebrate Christmas or anything like that, I look at the New Testament objectively. And what people have to realize is that Jesus was a Jew. He was a Sabbath-keeping Jew. He was a person who worshiped the God of Israel. And something interesting he always says that coincides with this story, and that is, follow me, right? You remember him telling the people, look, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. What people don't realize about that is what he means by follow me is the same connotation that Mattathias said right here, and that is, follow me, keep the commandments, and I'll make you fishers of men. Now, the fishers of men comment, as I brought up in other videos, is a comment brought up in Jeremiah chapter 16. God says he will send many fishers, so to speak, to fish the unfaithful out. And that's what this video is about. That's what this channel is about. It's trying to be a quote-unquote fisher of man by trying to get people to come back to God of Israel's voice. And what that means is you're going to have to forsake a lot of the customs that you've grown up with, Christmas being one of them. I hear the complaint a lot that people say, yeah, but I'm celebrating the birth of Jesus. What you have to understand is that Jesus is not God. Jesus is a man. Jesus was born. My God was never born. He's not a man. My God's name is Yehovah. So I understand the intent of the heart may be pure because you might think Jesus is God. That's the doctrine you brought up with. But that's what this channel is supposed to bring to light. I want to bring those truths back so you can come back to the truth, come back to the old ways that the God of Israel wants us to do. And even though even though it's a pagan festival that's been adopted and attached to Jesus, it doesn't matter even if it is about Jesus, because our God is not Jesus. Our God is the God of Israel. And just like these faithful few in the book of the Maccabees, we choose the God of Israel to worship. That's it. And we will not bow our knee to any other God, and we will not take upon pagan festivals or things in addition to what the God of Israel has given us, because if we would do that, we were no longer a people holy unto him. We all remember the problem that Moses had when he came down from the mount. There was only a few that were faithful. That was the Levites. And Moses said at the time, all those that are on Jehovah's side, take out your swords. And they slew their friends, their family, their brothers, their mother. And that's why Levi was given the priesthood. That's why. Because they were faithful to that covenant. And I just want to be one that God looks at and he can say, hey, he's faithful to the covenant. I know him. So this winter, no, I'm not celebrating Christmas. I don't really do anything for Hanukkah because there's no temple, but it is a tradition. It is something that has historical value, and I encourage all of you to read the book of the Maccabees. You can find it online on Bible Gateway, but I wish you the best this winter, and I just ask you to make the right choice and choose the God of Israel over anything else. If you have any questions, leave them below, and I hope to see you on another video.
Let there be light.